tail, not the dog. Community is the most important thing. Civic culture is what we have to build, and that is what we will lead to political change. Another quote, and I will end with that, another quote that I read yesterday from Pooja Nancy, who said, we move, our movement is like a slow-moving virus. We are a slow-moving virus. I want to warn you, we are uniquely Singapore. We are not Hong Kong. We are not even Malaysia. We are what we are, and that we have to recognize. But for all the pessimists in the room and outside, this book tells you a different story. Please read it. Please buy it, because we have to pay for the production costs. So I am hoping that you will all go downstairs and buy the book. Now I'll hand you over to the panelists. Ho Fang, you will? Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathy.
Ho Fang has been on the roll since last night. I don't think we didn't go to sleep till 4 o'clock this morning.
Yeah, because we wanted to prepare a session, a nice session for you. And as activists, this is going to be different. We have to be engaged, and we're going to tell you what engagement is all about. With us, we have Ms. Irene Ho, who's going to come up. I remember in the old days, in the 70s and in the 60s, 70s, 80s, there used to be songs for social change. And so Irene is going to come out to sing a song for you. And I hope that you are all join in, right? And we're going to sing one song now, and we're going to sing one at the end of this session. And how the performance is will tell us how successful this book has been. So make sure you sing out loud. Irene, thank you.
I have nothing to say in my defense, except that I have always been regarded as a troublemaker. I hope Bob Dylan is in sync with me.
You're all supposed to join in.
How many roads must a man walk down before they call him a man? How many seas must a white dove sail before she sleeps in the sand? How many times must the cannonballs fly before they're forever banned? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. How many years can a mountain exist before it is washed into the sea? How many years can some people exist before they're allowed to be free? And how many times can a man turn his head pretending he just doesn't see? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. How many times must a man look up before he can really see the sky? How many ears must one man have before he can hear people cry? And how many deaths will it take till he knows that too many people have died? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer
Thank you, Irene. That was lovely. Okay, now we start the program special. We only took 12 minutes, right? Okay, I'm going. You want to introduce the panelists? Oh, Elaine. Oh, yeah.
Okay. Hi, everyone. All right. Hi, everyone. Okay, it's working now. So it's great to see such a big turnout. I think when Connie asked us to do this, we weren't expecting this turnout. So it's wonderful that you all make time to come. My name is Elaine Ho, and I'm moderating this session. I was a member of TWC2 and TWC3. And I'm here to introduce the panelists first. We also have 3 framing questions to
Hey, Mr. Tambourine Man, play a song
the state
for
of civil
me.
society in Singapore
I'm not
today.
sleepy,
They've
and
given us a
there
very
is
hard
no
task
place
of
I'm
keeping to
going
time, so
to.
we're going to try our best. And there will be 15
Hey,
minutes
Mr.
for
Tambourine Man,
questions
play a
afterwards.
song for
Okay,
me.
so on my right
In the
is
jingle
Dr.
jangle
Neo
morning, I'll
Wei,
come
and she is a member of the
following you.
Volunteer Professionals SW101 that conducted a survey on
Though I
homelessness
know
in March
that
this year.
evening's
I'm
empire
just
is
going to stick to the
returned
one-liner
into
bios
sand.
in the interest of time.
Vanished
On my
from
left is
my
Sudhir
hand,
Thomas, and
left me
Sudhir is the
blindly
author
here
of
to
Looking on a
stand, but
Malayan
still
Breeze,
not
Travels in
sleeping.
Malaysia and Singapore, and co-author
My
of Hard Choices
weariness
Challenging the
amazes
Singapore
me, I'm
Consensus.
branded on
Extreme
my
left is
feet.
Dana Lam, and
I
Dana
have
is
no
former
one
president
to
of
meet,
AWARE,
and
and
the
is the author
ancient
of Days
empty
of Being
streets
Wild,
too dead
Walking
for
the Line of the
dreaming.
Opposition. Okay, so having
Hey,
introduced our
Mr.
three speakers, I really want
Tambourine
them in
Man,
advance
play
that
a
I'm going
song
to be
for
very strict
me.
on time.
I'm not
Because we
sleepy,
really would like
and
to save
there
time
is
to
no
take
place
questions
I'm
on the
going
floor.
to.
So my first sort of
Hey,
framing
Mr.
question
Tambourine
for
Man,
the
play a
panelists
song
was,
for
we wanted
me.
to understand what do they know of civil society and how it works. So maybe we can start with Yue.
Thank you, Connie, and thanks for inviting me to be part of this panel. Yeah, but I feel really I'm the newest newbie on the block and the least experienced in advocacy. Yeah, because we just started SW101, which is a very new kind of group of volunteers, professional volunteers who are advocating for social work advocacy. Yeah, because for the longest time we felt that social workers have kind of been in the fray and not been, part of this whole movement of social advocacy. So the goal of SW101 is to bring social workers back into the conversation of advocacy. So when I first read the chapters of the book, I think my immediate reaction is that, if only I've read this book much earlier. I wish it had come out much earlier, it has been published much earlier. But it's such a wonderful book because it's a very comprehensive documentation of all the efforts that people have made. I think what really struck me was that advocacy has been with us all this while. It's not something new. So right from the first chapter when I read Constance's chapter, and it really struck me that women's movements started all the way in the 1950s. And at that time, even the PAP Women's Wing and other feminists at that time were very powerful and outspoken advocates for women's rights. So advocacy has always been with us, and we have such a long history of feminism and feminist movements, and we shouldn't ever forget that. And I think as a newbie, I felt, if only I read the book earlier, I would be a lot braver when I joined SW101. I would be a lot more confident. And I think just knowing that, I'm just part of this little, I'm just a little dwarf, among so many giants in the history of advocacy. I think that itself gives me a lot of confidence to move ahead. Yeah. And I think the other few things that struck me as I read the book was that this book completely shattered myths about advocates, activists, and actually shattered myths about bureaucrats as well, civil servants, Of course, there's a lot of labeling of advocates and activists. They're anti-government, they're anti-PAP, they're anti-Singapore. But I think what we can see in several of the chapters is that the advocates, so I would like to kind of share what Chongki explained, when he when he said Syntacom was actually initiated upon the premise that an enlightened PAP will be pro-Singapore and was explicitly set up as both pro-PAP and pro-Singapore. But ironically, by doing so, and pointing out the flaws and dangers in existing policies, the effort was interpreted as anti-government. And similarly, I think Cherian argued quite convincingly in the last chapter that actually, if we allow more dissenting voices rather than suppressing them, this would actually work towards PAP's favor in the long term. He said, it is in the interest of ruling parties to allow independent and diverse media and to ensure an arm's-length relationship with regulators and public institutions, because you never know on which side of the fence you may be on. If we create strings to pull, your enemies will end up pulling them. Yeah, and I think this paragraph really struck me, that advocates are not anti-Singapore or even anti, and if we keep looking at issues through a kind of us and them lens, I think that's when the progress of advocacy would be impeded. And also, I think the book really shattered myths about bureaucrats as well. I mean, we like to think that, I used to be a civil servant. Yeah. And, it's easy to say that bureaucrats are all uncaring and they are nonchalant about things, yeah. But it was precisely when I was in the civil service that I made a lot of friends who today are actually together with me and being more involved in advocacy work. And I think that, to me, is very invaluable because it made me appreciate that sometimes there are allies already existing in the establishment, yeah, and we just need to find who these allies are. And I think in the many examples in the book, you also see that civil society groups have always been working quite closely with government agencies, and sometimes it doesn't mean that we need to collude with them. So it's not about collusion. It doesn't mean it doesn't mean that we need to compromise on our ideals or compromise on what we are set out to do. Yeah, but it's really just trying to find common allies within the establishment that will journey together with us for social change. Yeah, sure.
Okay, so maybe just to quickly set into context, the book actually covers a range of topics within civil society, from ageism to animal rights, race and religion, health, nature, heritage, academia, recap of past events, new media, literature, and the arts community. So Yue has mentioned the feminist groups, but I just wanted to also highlight that the book takes stock of the range of social causes that have been advanced in Singapore. And the book also engages in stock taking. It reveals the behind-the-scenes negotiations, and very importantly, it serves almost as a handbook for newer advocates. So just to make a spiel for the book, I strongly urge you to please get a copy for yourself, okay? All right, I want to actually shake things up a little and hand it over to Dana, okay? So we'll come back to Sudhir afterwards, because I think, I wanted to see how Dana responds to what some of the things that, Yue has said.
Hello? Yeah. Yes. Oh dear. Okay. There was only one point that I agree with what has been said, but there was one point that kind of rang an alarm, and which is that quite often, I think when we begin as Chongki has stated it, with a sort of innocence, and I myself truly believe that these people who are ruling the country, that they are behaving the way they behave because they don't know better. So if they knew better, surely it's rational to believe that they will take the right course of actions. And the fine line that we thread, working within, and how we have to kind of watch ourselves not falling into a trap into that kind of thinking, into that group think that the authorities have. And then I have actually 6 points, you know, and then she told me we have very little time, but I don't know how these 6 points are going to fit into the questions, but I'm just going to just throw it out anyway, 2 by 2. I wanted to quote Kirsten Han first, because what I read about three-thirds of the book, and there are many things in it which resonates and which I'm very happy to read. The point which I think agree with is that activists have to do what we do. We learn by doing. We strengthen our beliefs. We clarify our issues by doing. And by doing, we are actually showing others how to do, and also opening the issues, opening a window to the issues and the causes that we care for. And I think on this note, I think it's appropriate, this being the Singapore Writers' Festival, to actually also thank the writers, and I think it was a stroke of genius to have included that chapter on literature, because the writers, the artists, the people who work in theatre have been really consistently pushing pushing for an understanding of minority issues, race issues, gender issues. I feel it's a very consistent and intelligent, intelligible push that has been going on for a very long time. So we should thank them. Among the many essays that I enjoy in the book, the one from the Cat Welfare Society was a surprise and very heartwarming. Well, I had forgotten, or maybe I didn't even realize the thing about the massive cowling during the episode with SARS. I didn't realize, or I had forgotten, the memorial for cats that was held at a posh hotel. But what really warmed, sort of energized me was the image Vernon, the writer, painted for us of these groups of volunteers spreading out into all the corners of Singapore, north, south, east, and west on a Sunday, say, just like today, to knock on doors on behalf of cat welfare. And the other note that she says, just by the data that they could collect, just by doing the rounds in their neighborhoods on the conditions of status of cats in Singapore, was eye-opening. And it reminded me of the early days of AWARE, where our pioneers were really just stood up and go out and do their things, right? They organized the talks in different parts of Singapore, a lot of it in Queenstown. This note is very encouraging because I noticed a common thread among the more successful NGOs especially, is that they talk about how their success has been based on their research and the data they are able to collect. But my experience is that this point itself can be crippling to small NGOs without the means, the time, and so forth to collect the data. Plus, we don't have a control of access to data. A lot of data we don't know where. So that itself is a big stumbling block. Maybe I've done my 2 points.
Yes, thank you. Over to you, Sudhir. Do you want to respond to any of the comments, or maybe share what particularly jumped up for you in the book?
Anyway, now you all know that even among activists in Singapore, the Indians are always last. Joke.
I'm sorry, Connie spoke first. Yeah, she said I spoke first.
I could say male. I could say male as well.
Yes. Be gentlemanly.
But the first thing I actually have to say is congratulations to everybody involved in this, and to all the people that you represent. I'm just a writer. I'm not actually an activist. I know many people involved. Many of the characters. It's been great to read about sort of the nitty-gritty of what they actually go through. In Singapore, it's funny. I always have a chuckle when, senior politicians and civil servants talk about the great sacrifices and responsibility that they bear for our country, when they're earning millions of dollars a year and actually pursuing career paths that are sanctioned by everybody in society. They're being lauded by the media and by the public. I think actually a lot of the heroes in Singapore society are the people you read about in this book who are doing thankless work for the most part, earning little or no money, and as you'll see when you read it, the work they've done, contrary to the Singapore story of government being comprehensive and all-encompassing and taking care of all our needs. What you actually find is that there are a lot of holes in society that have been plugged by the people doing very good work in here, from the big victories like Lake Jawa to very small things like Acres, setting up Singapore's first 24/7 wildlife rescue helpline. So a lot of good work being done, which often gets missed in the great Singapore narrative. And to Yoyan's point, I remember reading the late Chinese activist Liu Xiaobo a few years ago, and he talks about activism in an authoritarian state, and that there's a lot of misunderstanding between those working on the inside and those working on the outside, particularly in authoritarian states. And in Singapore, Singapore's a funny place because in some ways we're very open and very democratic, and in other ways we're very closed and very repressed. But I think in this, when it comes to activism, there are actually a lot of similarities between Singapore and more autocratic states, in that I see a lot of misunderstanding between those working on the inside and those working on the outside. And for those on the inside, they often see those on the outside as troublemakers, as attention seekers. Those on the outside, when they look in at the senior civil servants and politicians, they often see them as being dispassionate, maybe being motivated more by money or by self-interest rather than the public good. What has been interesting for me in this book is you see the evolution over the last sort of 30, 40 years in Singapore, and increasing alignment between people working on the outside and people working on the inside. Still a long way to go, but I think it's a positive story for our country. So that's opening comments.
Thank you very much. Okay. So in the chapter by Imran and Connie, they both mentioned that actually labeling doesn't help to advance causes, and sometimes polarization can close doors instead. I think as Sudhir helpfully mentioned as well, in as much as the government may be effective in certain ways, there's always still space for civil society advocates to bring new issues to the fore. And this book has covered a range of essays. It started off, I understand, that with the intention to feature writings or essays by the 18 or the previous Singapore Advocacy Award winners, and it kind of gradually grew into a much larger writing project. So I want to kind of turn back to Yue now and ask, for you, which of the chapters jumped out at you, like, particularly in terms of maybe the issue done, or the way that it was, the issue was advanced, or perhaps, what did not surprise you in terms of the issues that were covered in the book?
Thanks. I think because for me as a newbie sort of advocate, I think the chapter that I found really quite useful were those chapters. There are several chapters where there were very helpful tips and advice about advocacy, and I think the one of which, I mean there are many, because of time constraint I can't share everyone, but I'd like to share Corina's chapter, and she gave very useful tips for new advocates like us, and I think the thing that really struck me was that we need to use different strategies, and there are different strategies, so as advocates, we need to have like a bag of different types of tools, and those different types of tools can be used. We need to find opportunities, the right timing, the right situations, and those tools, we can use those tools in the appropriate moments. So a lot of advocacy work could be also about timing and the opportunities that come up, yeah. And of course, the whole idea about research, I think research is a double-edged sword, but nevertheless is a very important tool to have, yeah, because you need to support your cause through evidence, yeah. And I do agree that, you know, in our climate where the government does not share important information about ourselves, the only alternative we have is to find that knowledge ourselves, yeah, to look for that data ourselves, yeah. And that was also our own experience in our street survey on homelessness, because prior to that, there was nothing on homelessness, yeah. And now, at least, even though it's not the study has its own limitations, but we now have a form and shape of what homelessness looks like, yeah. And I think, yeah, that's my...
The other thing that stood out about Karina's chapter as well, she's over there, was she highlighted that advocacy is playing the long game. So there has to be perseverance and grit over an extended period of time. Going back to the issue of research and documentation, I think maybe for the smaller groups, you know, if you don't have those resources, another thing to consider is to find academics who can support you in that kind of research, because there are academics who have done so, and it's about identifying the right partners. So I'm going to shake things up a little bit again and actually hand the mic over to Sudhir, our Indian gentleman, so that he can share with us, you know, which chapters kind of came up for you, and or if, yeah, what surprised you or what did not.
Yeah. Hello. Yeah. I guess there were two issues that I found quite interesting. I mean, I didn't read the whole book, maybe about half the book. But in that half that I read, you know, I think two issues I found interesting. One was, you know, what is the role of sort of new migrants and foreigners in activism? What should be the role, and you know, how welcoming should we be of them? And you know, my base instinct is we should be very welcoming of them. I know not everybody in Singapore agrees with this point of view. It was interesting to read about Sharon Fosda, I guess. I hadn't heard that story before, who was an Indian migrant, started the Singapore Council of Women. And I wonder whether in today's context, we would be as willing to accept an initiative from a new migrant in Singapore. And so there are lots of stories of foreigners in this book, you know, Nature Society, Sungai Buloh. And it seems to me that in certain aspects of life where we're more willing to, or certain forms of activism, we're more willing to accept foreign involvement. And, you know, of course, there's the story of Lucy Davis, who, you know, for those of you who don't know, probably over the course of the past 15 years went from permanent resident to, you know, persona non grata in Singapore. Largely, most people suspect because of her death penalty activism. So it seems to me Singapore as a global city is, and I don't know where the onus or responsibility is in terms of incorporating the views of foreigners and migrants into activism. I think it involves everybody, but it seems to me that we're much more willing in some aspects of life to accept foreign involvement in activism, and much less so in other aspects of life. The other thing that was interesting, Kirsten's piece, was I didn't know, you know, sort of she talks about the lack of coordination between activists and opposition politicians and NMPs and all, and that sort of thing. I think Kirsten wrote about the debate around the Administration of Justice Bill in 2016. So essentially contempt of court, which Singapore passed a bill last year. And Kirsten wrote about how activists were surprised by the positions of NMPs and opposition politicians, you know, which struck me as kind of odd. You know, why wouldn't activists be more aware of what the positions of NMPs and opposition politicians are? And maybe there's some work to be done there as well. So those are two issues.
Okay, great. Over to Dana for her 2 points, and after that, I would like to open it to the floor for Q&A, just to preserve space for the rest of you.
Okay, that's very quick. I should have to jump to my last 2 points. And on the point of engaging academics help in research, don't forget, then the academic might at some point in time be asked to apologize for his research, you know? I read about 3/3 of the book, and I'm very proud of it. Yes, yes. And at some point, I noticed that I was avoiding one particular chapter, and I had to ask myself why and go read it, and make myself go read it, and it was the chapter on aging. I was thinking, am I guilty of ageism myself in this particular instance by avoiding that chapter? But anyway, it seems to, I mean, a lot of us talk about how in order for activism to work, there has to be like a core issue that everybody can resonate with. And it occurred to me that if in a few years, the majority of people will be older than 60 or 65, maybe we will be a core force, you know, and that will be the next galvanizing point. I don't know how related this is, but reading the book reminded me of a subject in school called civics, or civics period, remember? I can't remember what we were taught, but in my children's time, it became social studies, right? Even in primary school and secondary school. And then it became national education. So I thought that this alone shows us how as people of Singapore or as citizens of Singapore, our minds have been slowly compressed to narrower and narrower and narrower frames. And this is the difficulty activists have, or anybody who is interested in working for the good of society has. And I guess this is why I resonate with Chongqi saying that the way forward is to really speak to our people rather than to speak to the people in power. No doubt we need the collaboration. No doubt you don't go shutting doors and closing bridges behind you. But the more important thing is to speak to the people. And I think we have done quite a lot of that, judging from the work. And I think we see the effect of it. And I think the greatest the most exciting and promising point I feel was mentioned by Connie at the beginning, that we are seeing younger people who are really sound in their knowledge of cultural studies and so forth, so that they have the tools, they have the vocabulary to articulate what needs to be changed. Thank you.
Oh, all right. Okay. Thank you. Yes, I knew you hadn't finished. Go on.
I forgot one point. Oops.
It shut you off.
Who shut me up? Okay. Okay. I have to do this, right? We are doing great. Right in front of us is now, what are we going to do with people like Silan Pillay, whose case is still pending, I think? What are we going to do with, what's very important to me, restitution for those people who have been incarcerated or without trial for all these numbers of years? Dr. Chia Tai Po, who Silan Pillay's action was trying to bring back to our memory, and all our friends in part of the Marxist conspiracy group. What are we going to do about that? We have made advances in many areas in terms of what we're trying to advocate for, who, how, and what will be the cost of getting this restitution.
Thank you. Thank you, Dana. Certainly there remains more work to be done. For the next 15 minutes or so, we'll open up to the floor for questions. I'm sure that many of you here would either like to respond to what has been mentioned or bring up new issues for discussion. So please feel free to do so. There will be a mic that someone will run around and pass it to the person asking the question. In the interest of time, and I'm dragging this to give you time to prepare for your question. So in the interest of time, nonetheless, please keep your question short. Perhaps cut down the descriptive parts of it, context setting, and just go straight for the question. Okay, can we maybe invite the first question? Anyone? Yes, the gentleman over there.
Hi, my name's Chris. I'm from Climate Conversations. I wanted to ask about the myth that you raised of the us versus them. And I agree, like, I feel like within civil society, it's something that's slowly being dismantled, but I find that it's something we keep bumping up against in our engagement with the public. And I wanted to ask the panel, you know, what will it take for that myth to be dismantled in the public's mind?
Would any of you like to maybe?
Okay. I guess maybe that it's not an easy, there are no easy solutions, yeah. But I'm just thinking that sometimes maybe we can make more effort to mainstream some of these issues. Because sometimes there could be a thinking that, you know, this particular problem or this particular issue only affects this small group of people. Yeah, but I think we need to find that some way of bringing that issue out and make people realize that that issue is much bigger, because one day it's going to affect all of us. Yeah, so for things like ageism, right now we are in the progress. I think it hasn't hit us yet that we are going to have a lot more older people in the next few years. Yeah, and to prepare that, I think we need to get people to understand that this is not just about this small group of people who are old, because all of us are going to be old one day, so we need to make that sort of preparation. And so I guess a lot of it has to do with, trying to find an angle to mainstream some of these issues. That could be a start, yeah. But it is not the only solution that we should have, yeah.
Surya?
Sorry, I just want to, when us and them is what, like, who is us and who is them? It's like, okay. I think it's important for government to be more aware of the fact and more public about the fact that activists actually have a very important role to play. You know, the sense I get so far, maybe this is wrong, but you know, government will work with civil society when goals align, and then they often end up co-opting the success without necessarily attributing the roles of the activists and the entire history and background about why this initiative has come to where it is. And in that, you know, there are many strands we can go down, but, you know, some people tell me in that context it's been helpful for Lewis to be elected as a politician. Some people tell me it's actually very unhelpful because, you know, it actually blurs lines and leads to a lot of, you know, people not recognizing the roles better of civil society activists. So I think that's, you know, for the Singapore public to appreciate the role of advocacy, activism, civil society, I think it's important, you know, as a starting point for government to actually acknowledge that role as well.
Dana, do you want to?
I think there will always be a they and us, simply because they have to protect their own power and position, and they are insecure and nervous and reactive, and we are what we are. But I understand several of the chapters. I think Ho Fang did mention something about how there need to be a certain kind of cooperative, harmonious type of negotiations, a willingness to listen to each other, a willingness to recognize that perspectives, can come from very different people, even among activists ourselves, that we may be advocating for the same cause, but our style, our manners, our understanding, our presentations may be different. I am so well schooled by this system that I'm always a very good girl. And so I always tend to believe that one has to behave rationally and behave like a good girl. And I have also seen that that doesn't work. There have been times, right? Even if we just took women's rights, if the earlier so-called militant feminists, if they didn't stump, what do you call that? If they didn't pound on tables, if they didn't turn chairs over, we wouldn't be able to walk into a meeting with the authorities and be respected and heard as an individual. Thank you.
So when I said she was a good girl, Margie and I looked at each other. But I think, Dana is right to say that there needs to be a range of tactics. And I think the other thing important to point out, which some of the chapters in the book actually do, Heritage Society, Nature Society, and Aware, that building rapport with the policymakers is important as well, because they need to know how to trust the advocates as well in terms of, that we also want what's best for Singapore. There are quite a number of hands, actually. Oh, there was a response. So, Kani has a response, is it? Oh, okay, sure, yeah.
I want to respond to can you hear me?
Yes.
I think it's perfectly all right to be us against them. And because if there was no us against them, there would be no advocacy. And the us are usually visionaries. And we are more, we are more aware of what's happening in society. We care about niche issues and other issues. And I think this push to be always wanting to be harmonious is more, I don't know, a Confucian sort of a, why, as long as what we are advocating for is something that some of us believe in, not just one person alone, and it is what we believe is for the good of the society, I think we have to stand our ground. And eventually what happens is, not only do we educate the public that doesn't see it, of course, part of the public will see it, and also to educate the politicians and the people who are in power who don't see it. And we have seen that through the years, we have educated the leadership. Now there's so much more agreeing with things like, oh yes, gender, sexism, and all that, and even racism, and obviously even ageism. The isms are slowly getting to be, so I think we do not have to apologize for us and them, as long as we do it with respect and with the proper knowledge and the proper passion and the proper research.
Yeah, there have been... So there have been battles won. So for instance, advances in gender equality, recognizing women's rights, employment conditions of migrant workers, and also in the chapter, again, going back to the book, the chapter by AFA has also mentioned the changes made to protect people with HIV/AIDS. So we mustn't forget the successes that we have in civil society too. Okay, there's a question behind. I think Ho Fang was pointing to a gentleman.
Could I just ask the panel, in your opinion, what are the really key factors that inhibits the growth of civil society or even stifle? Is it policies? Is it laws?
Sorry, what are the key, we didn't catch?
The key factors that stifle and inhibits the growth of civil society.
Okay. Any of you, what is the most important legislation, policy, changing mindsets? Sudhir's ready? No? Connie would like to respond to this.
I think one of the, I go from my own experience, one of them is the lack of media support is one, because that involves public education and raising awareness of enough number of people in our society to be concerned about. Because when we first started the Violence Against Women campaign, nobody knew, it wasn't talked of. It was one of those issues which was silenced, And I think that also applies to sexuality and HIV. And the way to do that, first, the most important part is to educate our citizens. And once the large number of people are interested and concerned, then the government will move. You know, but it does take 10, 15 years for that process. And one of the things you find in the book is that the more successful organizations like Nature Society, Cat Welfare Society, Action for AIDS, Nature Society, Aware, it's a long, long journey. And education, and 30 years, now they're 30 years, Nature Society is much older, they're established, they're respected because of the work they did. It's hard work, and that's what makes for success. I hope I have answered your question.
Okay,
Have I?
thank you.
Answered my question? Your question, sorry. One factor. Another one, of course, is educating the government, which comes from educating people. All right? And organizational structure, and a core group of people who stay with the journey. In all the organizations that mentioned, you had founding members staying on for 30 years, sticking to the founding values and the founding goal. And that, I think, is very important. Is that commitment to a goal, a commitment to a value, a commitment to the organization that you started, which is very important. Thank you very much. I think, Jolaman, you want to answer.
Okay, thank you. I think Dana has something to add, just quickly.
Can I add to the... I have to make that point about restitution for the people who have been jailed without trial. And one of the reasons is these were our pioneer advocates. They were the front runners. And today, the bullying, what else is there? The bullying and the calling for apologies and so forth are still there. Chongki talked about, you know, how new ways of control can be invented. But what we are seeing really are not new ways. They are just a continuation of the old ways. So I think fear is also fear and probably ignorance, you know, not knowing how to go about the way, not understanding the issue, and then what we see happening before our eyes.
Okay, Connie, can I have a bit more time into your closing remarks? We take one more question. Yeah. So one more question. Anyone?
Hi.
There's
I'm over here.
okay.
So I'm just wondering if, in a lot of areas of advocacy, does it just boil down to a waiting game where you wait for a high-level bureaucrat to do something? Because when political will, what do you do? Because I guess you could say that we could just continue advocating and raising awareness, but in some cases there is already awareness. So let's say marital rape very shamefully is still legal in Singapore, and you have some top-level politicians that come out and say, oh yeah, let's do something about it, and then nothing gets done at all for years. So it's like, are you just going to keep building awareness until someone decides to do something? And like, until what point do you wait for? And then the second part to this is, what if in some cases the public doesn't agree with us, even if they are aware of the issue? So let's say better treatment of gay and trans people. Are we just going to wait for Singapore where the public agrees, a majority of the public agrees that there should be better treatment? Because if we have to continue to educate the public and wait for a day where the country agrees with us, you know, lots of gay and trans people, we're all either going to kill ourselves or leave Singapore. So we can't wait for the tides to change.
I'm going to have to cut you off because we've got 5 minutes. So anyone wants to respond to this? Maybe to sort of give people a chance to think about it, I would say that actually advocacy is not just about waiting passively. So perhaps what an observer may see as waiting passively, actually behind the scenes, as many of these chapters show, there's a lot of behind the scenes work that's taking place, whether it's meeting with different stakeholders, policymakers, working through NMPs or other prominent people in society. Actually, there's a lot of behind the scenes work that's taking place even as it appears that we're waiting. We have fun, yes. You just have to attend some of these dinners that, you know, Connie organizes. There's lots of fun. Would any of you like to respond to that? Is it a waiting game?
I just want to add, well, we have to wait, we have to be very patient, but we have to be very active. So active listening, active waiting. But the point I wanted to make about, when I talked about the bullying and so forth, is that if I may draw an analogy from exercise, you need resistance in order to stretch a muscle, in order to lengthen a muscle's reach, in order to strengthen a muscle, you need resistance. So, we just have to welcome all of that as part of the way society moves.
Yeah, strength training, right? Yeah. I think also the other thing to add is even if the public doesn't agree. So when I remember with TWC2, on domestic workers, right, the working rights of domestic workers, the public did not agree, right? But then there were different initiatives put in place to actually heighten awareness. So over time, especially as, as we've sort of transitioned to a new generation, you'll find that younger Singaporeans are more open about respecting the rights of domestic workers in Singapore. So in other words, even if you feel that the public doesn't agree with your cause, it doesn't mean that you should just drop your cause and run, because there can be initiatives put in place to change people's mindsets. And in fact, yeah, I think nowadays it's become a mainstream issue if you look at how successful transient workers council is. I think we do need to draw this to a close. So who is giving the closing remarks? Okay, Ho Fang.
Hello. Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry we have to respect the time of the next incoming book launch. But I tell you, I reminded you all once, if you sing loud enough, I promise you there will be another session like this. Okay? We will hold it somewhere else and we'll do it for 2-3 hours, all right? So sing. Irene, could you please?
This time it's John Lennon who's going to be backing us. No, that's not John Lennon.
Okay, maybe while we're waiting for that, can you just join me in thanking the panelists and thank you.
Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us. Above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. Oh, you may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will be as one. Imagine no possessions. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger. A brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. Dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us and the world will live as one. Okay, now you're all officially troublemakers like me.
Thank you all so very much. And I had forgotten to thank the contributors because you did an amazing job. This is an amazing book. And something else too, we need conversations like this. So we won't have us and them, us in civil society activists and them outside of civil society. We're all part of civil society. And I think we need conversations like this. We will have more discussions about the book soon, and we will, as Ho Fang promised, we will spend more time talking, just chatting, getting to know each other. And thank you all very much. Buy the book. Thank you.